It's nice to be here. I arrived yesterday in Budapest, and it's the first time I've been here since 1984. So I have noticed a slight change. But as I had dinner with my friend Steve here last night, and I said the only two things I could remember was visiting the Parliament House and going to a circus, which strikes me as like, after all those years, it's like, why the heck did I go to a circus in Budapest? But apparently that's what living in Budapest is like, right? So, I'm Dave McCauley. I am originally from Sydney, Australia. I've lived in Asia for the last 25 years. Most of the time I worked for McCann, the ad agency. I was the head of strategic planning for Asia Pacific for about 18 of those years. And I also was the president of McCann Thailand and McCann Hong Kong, and lived in Japan for 10 years. Lots of places in Asia. The last 3 years and a bit, I've been doing some private consulting for different companies. These are some of the clients I've worked with in the last few years. For these particular clients, I've been using an AI platform to help understand the narratives that they were looking for, or to analyse the narratives they were using around different brand stories and storytelling. So I'm sure all of you are more than aware that storytelling, you know, is the boring subject at the moment in the marketing world. I say boring because any of us that know anything about marketing know that it's always been about storytelling. It's just the way you tell the stories change. Well, my job primarily was to help figure out the stories that brands were going to tell. It still remains that. The difference is that I sometimes do it in goofy ways. So unfortunately, before some of you go Googling me, if you do Google me, you're going to see all these crazy photos of me on stage with my trousers around my ankles, or sitting on toilets on stage. And as Steve points out, I end up talking about toilets and underwear an awful lot, and I will continue to do that tonight, as will become self-evident. The problem today in marketing is that as I travel around, work with all sorts of companies, and then work with different agencies and different suppliers and the media, is this propensity for us to all jump into whatever's the fad at the moment. You know, so is it digital marketing? Is it mobile marketing? Is it social marketing? Is it influencer marketing? Well, none of those are actually marketing. They're just tactics, right? So the problem, though, is that we sometimes forget that in getting to use one of these things, there's a whole bunch of other things influencing the storytelling that we put together. So I hope to be able to make some of that sort of clear as I go along. Here are three really important mediums. So yes, underpants, toilets, and mobile phones. So these are three really important mediums. Now, what do we mean by a medium? Well, a medium is a means for telling a story. So let me show you an example, okay? These three fine young gentlemen sitting up the front row. You never sit in the front row if I'm talking, okay? If I was to ask these three gentlemen to stand up right now, and all four of us pulled down our pants, what would happen?
Giggles.
Yes, there'd be giggles. There'd be a slight flushing. This guy's really going into a panic about it. Right?
I was just checking that.
He's actually sitting there going, yes, let me do it.
I'm sitting here thinking, thanks
Yeah.
that I put pants on.
Yeah, so, but what would happen if we all stood, four adult men, not really the same age, but adult men, stood up in Budapest right now and tore their pants down? What can you guarantee? If I offered you €100 bet, I will never lose.
Take their camera out.
Huh?
Yeah.
Everybody's going to take their camera out.
People will take their cameras out, yes. But what else?
Put it on Instagram story.
They'll probably put it on Instagram, but I'm just talking about when we pull down our pants, what are you all going to see?
Your underwear.
We're going to see our underwear, and what's going to be special about our underwear?
Yours is pink.
No, actually, but not far off, actually. If I've done this many times in audiences all over the world, and I can guarantee you that if the four of us stood up right now, pulled down our trousers, that we would be wearing 4 different pairs of underpants. A so-called very low interest category. I don't believe in the word low interest categories, but it's called that. And why is it that the four of us will be wearing different underpants? underwear, by its nature, is a purely functional product. But it's been far removed from functionality for nearly 100 years. It's now about emotional drivers. It's about our preference, our self-image. In the case of men's underpants, by the way, who's the primary purchaser of men's underpants around the world? Women. Around 65% of all men's underwear is purchased by women. Why? Because like everything else in life, men are fundamentally lazy fuckers, right? If our wives don't buy new underpants, we wear them till they literally fall apart. By the way, in a survey done in the United States a couple of years ago, 11% of men admitted to the fact that they wear holey underpants until they literally can't wear them anymore. Admitted to it. So, you know, it's an important medium because underpants are a way in which we express ourselves, a way in which when we drop our pants, wherever it may be, in the changing rooms at a gym, when we're playing football with our buddies, when we're about to make love to a stranger we just picked up in a bar. It's a medium that expresses who we are, or a medium that expresses what our wife or our girlfriend wants to project who we are. What about toilets? That's a medium. Toilets are arguably the longest social medium on the history of humankind. We know that people have been using toilets as social media for at least 10,000 years, because that's the oldest piece of toilet graffiti we've ever discovered. People use, in all cultures around the world, toilets, public toilets, private toilets were used as means for passing on messaging. Now, they still are. In work I did in Southeast Asia a few years ago, we found out that the number one technology that defines a middle-class home is a toilet. Because as one housewife in a newly middle-class home in Bangkok explained to us, well, all my relatives that still live in basically grass huts in villages, they have mobile phones. Most of them have a TV set. Some have refrigerators. If you could steal electricity from the power lines, you can run all that stuff. But I'm the only one that lives in a house with a flushing toilet, so therefore I live in the most advanced home. It's the truly defining technology of being middle class in the world today. And what about our phones? Well, of course, we can't live without our phones. All of us in this room use our phones all the time. But here's the thing, all three of these are now digital mediums as well. Sorry, it's a bit slow. We are ourselves always using mediums to help project who we are. If I asked you, how often do you put your name into a search engine? Who's Googled themselves today? Apart from me. Who's obviously the biggest ego in the room, right? Okay, well I had to do that because I knew some of you might afterwards, so I wanted to check what was there, right? That's my story and I'm sticking to it, yeah. What about in the last week? Who's Googled themselves in the last week? Last month? Whoa. Okay. How many of you work in anything to do with marketing? Yeah? How often do you Google the brand you work on?
Every day.
Do you Google it every day?
Yeah.
And do a Google search on the brand? That's really good. In most times when I talk to 50 odd people, maybe 3 have Googled their brand in the last week. But wait a minute, what's the most important brand in your life?
Kobe?
Yeah.
I'm working for a company for toys. And
Sorry. I'm Dave McCollum. What's your name? Sorry?
Judy.
Sorry?
Judy.
Judy, right? So Judy, what's the most important brand in your life? You. You. Everyone in this room, come on, basic marketing practice is to understand that the key thing that you are trying to sell, to market to the world, is yourself. I cannot understand people that don't Google check themselves, because if you're in business in any way, other people are Googling you, aren't they? Aren't they going to LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook to check out who you are? Well, you should be, just like you would be monitoring the brand you work on, the number one brand you service is yourself. Now, different countries will do this in different levels. For example, in a survey we did of 16 to 29-year-olds a few years ago, we found that 16 to 29-year-olds in 30 countries around the world, the average was that 17% Google themselves at least once a month. It went up to 35% in India. 35% of Indians in that age group Google themselves at least once a month. Now, the reasons they do that for is because, quite simply, they want as many people commenting on them as possible. We found that in the more developing, fast-growing, heavily developing countries, that the need to make sure that your story is the story you want projected becomes really important, because you only get one shot. One shot to maybe get into the right university, one shot to get the right job. So you've got to have the right Google profile, because everybody's going to Google you. That's just common sense, right? When you employ somebody today, don't you Google them? Of course you do, right? If you don't, how the hell do you know what they really are about? Because they define themselves, especially anybody under 35, defines themselves by their Facebook page, their other social media activity, etc., right? This is what branding's all about. 53 is a wonderful number to me. 53. Why 53? In the same survey, when we asked 16 to 22-year-olds, we gave them a list of 40 objects in their life. Things like their favourite shoes, their favourite pair of pants, their favourite t-shirt, their favourite piece of music, their favourite website, their favourite computer game, their passport, and for some reason we chucked in there their mobile phone and their nose. And we said, pick the two that you could not live without. Now, not surprisingly, when they said forced to pick two, they said my nose and my mobile phone. And then we said, now you can only have one of those. So think about that. For the rest of your life, you can either have your nose and the sense of smell, or you can have your mobile phone. Which one would you pick?
Keeping the nose.
You're keeping the nose, right? Well, 53% of 16 to 22-year-olds across 30 countries said, no, I'll keep the phone. In some places like India, that went up to 73%. Right? And why? Because this is a sense, this is a sense, this is a sense, this is a sense. Well, that's a sense. That truly is how many, many people now sense the world, right? You can't possibly comprehend what's going on in the world unless you have access to a mobile phone. Not just because you don't want to get lost and you need Google Maps, but because everybody you meet, you want to have a sense of who they are. Every time you encounter a new brand, you want to have a sense of what it's about. You've got to try a new product, you want to have a sense of what it is. Somehow I've hurt my knee the last few days, which is why I'm limping sort of strange. So what am I doing? I'm trying to Google things to find out what it could possibly be wrong. You know? We're doing this all the time. But here's the interesting thing. Let's go back to underwear, toilets. And they're all mobile digital devices now. This is a particular app that you can buy that is embedded into your underpants. Now, it can do two things. One is we all leak into our underpants. It measures the leak, so it measures the urine that you accidentally leak into your underpants, and it can measure your sugar level and a bunch of other biofactors out of what you're leaking into your underpants, as you're doing right now as I'm pointing. He's so excited, he's just had a little pee. Yeah. The other thing it does, though, you can buy a different version of the same app, and what it does is while you're putting on your underpants, if your wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, is buying, you buy underpants for them as well, you use the same app, and you can actually sexually stimulate them wherever they are. So you could be sitting there playing with your phone now, Mark, and your girlfriend, wherever she is, and you could be actually getting her really excited by doing that, right? So, digital devices, right? It's everywhere. Toilets. I lived in Japan for 10 years. Anybody travelled to Japan? Ever been on Japan? What's the number one thing that particularly Westerners comment on when they get back home from a visit to Japan? Right? I went to my hotel room and I couldn't believe, like, the toilet was amazing, right? It had this computer panel there and it had about 7 different things that flushed every part of my body, and it was great, you know. Well, one of the things that they introduced at, I don't know what happened then. Right. Toto toilets in some of our higher end toilets a few years ago, sorry, we'll get there in a minute, introduced this, that little sensor. So every time you go to the toilet and you take a pee, it captures a few drops of it. It does 17 different body measurements. So it measures your temperature, your blood sugar levels, all sorts of things. You can also have the seat adjusted so it'll actually weigh you while you're sitting there. But here's the important stuff. All that data gets fed straight to your doctor. So every time you take a pee at home on your toilet, it goes straight to your doctor and he gets whatever that might be, 2, 3, 5, if you're old like me, maybe 27 times a day, you know, a reading on what's going on. But here's a really smart thing. Japan, as you know, is the country with the oldest population in the world. So when you have a dramatically aging population, companies have to adjust to it. So Toto brings out these toilets and it starts selling them on the idea that you can have all this at home so that your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather, every time they go to the toilet, the doctor gets a readout on how they're doing health-wise, right? But then the number one digital company in terms of innovation in the world, my favourite digital innovation company, which is called Nintendo, came out with this thing. You remember when the Wii was launched? Okay. Now, Wii was first launched aimed at the ageing population of Japan. It was not aimed at all of you with kids like Steve's kids who are about this big. It was actually aimed at older people, people over 65. And the idea was that sitting at home or standing at home, you'd be able to play tennis or play golf and get in some exercise. Now, it led to two things. One was it led in Japan to a DIY revolution. Well, not really DIY. What they found was that there was a huge increase of sales of DIY products and of people hiring others to come in and basically expand their tiny lounge rooms so they could get their swing in while they played golf or played tennis at home. But the other interesting thing they did was that when you subscribe to this service that was attached to the Wii machine, all of the data from every time you played a game on the Wii Fit machine, the data was collected centrally. Okay? So you could find out whether your golf game was getting better or worse, or your baseball game was getting better, or how many boxing matches you were actually winning. That was great. But importantly, it could also get fed back to your doctor. So that what would happen was that older people in Japan could have their biofunctions measured every time they took a pee, all their exercise they did measured every time they exercised at home. It all went back to the doctor, so the doctor could literally every day get a combined readout to say, your blood sugar's gone up slightly, but I noticed you didn't do as much exercise today. Now, how cool is that, right? It's not huge, it's not a market that's really huge, but it's an essential part of the way in which companies are now integrating digital services. Of course, we all love using our phones, and if you don't find this interesting and you think that I'm just another funny Australian talking a lot of nonsense, please pull out your mobile phone. In fact, I'm sort of surprised that there's so few mobile phones on the counters. Is that because you don't own a mobile phone, or?
I have it at home.
Oh,
I don't take it with me.
you don't take it with you? Wow, okay. That's the best answer I've had in a long time. Okay, so the fact is, if you find me boring, go ahead and Google me, or you can fub me. Do you know what fubbing is? Fubbing is this. When you walk around like this, when you're sitting there in a meeting like this, when you're focused on your phone no matter what else is going around. It's a term that was developed in Australia by a dictionary, the Macquarie Dictionary in Australia about 5 years ago. They were trying to find reasons to convince people that they should buy actual real dictionaries, like books. I mean, when was the last time you bought a dictionary? Yeah, exactly. What kind of idiot buys dictionaries, right? So can you imagine if you're a dictionary man, you're a publishing house and your major product is dictionary. So what they did was very simple. They figured out a very simple marketing ploy. What's the basis of good marketing? The basis of good marketing is always finding out what people want and then figuring out how your product can help them achieve what they want. Now, one of the things they figured out that people want is they want quirky words. People love the new slang. They love quirky words. So they got together some linguists at a university in Australia and said, invent a word for people that are doing this, just walking around with this in their face and ignoring what else is going on. They invented the word fubbing. And fubbing literally is where you are standing around just doing that, right? So it's an interesting term. It helped them sell a bunch of encyclopedias. Then a couple of years later it became so popular that the Oxford OED, The LED, what's it? Anyway, the LED adopted it, made it one of the words of the year, etc., etc. But the initial thing was that the cool thing for me was they did marketing. They didn't sell dictionaries. They found out what people wanted and found a way in which they could deliver something that helped what people wanted. Quirky new words. So, fub me if you wish. We all use all sorts of these. Has anybody got one of these types of devices on at the moment? Yeah? Okay. Can I just ask you a question? Do you do 10,000 steps a day?
Yes.
Has anybody else ever tried doing the 10,000 step a day thing?
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of this, about doing 10,000? Why is it 10,000 steps? Why 10,000?
Because it's easy to achieve.
No. That's a good answer. But why is it 10,000? Okay, this is another great marketing story. What was the biggest single event in the world in 1964? The Tokyo Olympics. 20 years after World War II, suddenly Japan, which everybody around the world thought was this broken country, held this amazing Olympics. And at the Tokyo Olympics, they showcased the opening of the Shinkansen. Not only the fastest trains in the world, but so much better and faster than it was like 5 times better and faster than any other train in the world. They showcased the Toyota car factories, the first automated robotic factories in the world. Suddenly in 1964, Japan went from this wreck of a country to being, holy crap, it's more developed than anywhere else. And a lot of Japanese companies tried to get on the bandwagon. So one company in Japan came up with a very simple idea. They created a little device and you pinned it on your belt. And every time you took a step, it knocked against your belt and measured a step. Well, that sounds pretty cool, right? So they created this thing hanging off this lady's belt. But, whoa, how are we going to get people to buy it? They created the idea of 10,000 steps. And they created the idea that 10,000 steps is really good for you. And they sort of implied that all these Olympic athletes that were clustering into Tokyo, they would be doing the equivalent of 10,000 steps a day. That's how come they were so strong and fit. Why was it really 10,000? Well, because in Japanese culture, 10,000 is a lucky number. That's the only basis for it. But they didn't sell it that way, because who cares about the Japanese luck if you're a foreigner, right? They sold it on the premise of 10,000. Sounds like a lot of steps. That'll do. That'll make it really awesome. And literally from 1964 till today, that whole industry of those types of tools, the thing you got on your waist, is sold on that Japanese myth. Sorry, this is really slow. Okay. Now, of course, you can do things that measure, your heart rates, etc. I don't know if you've seen that some companies are now playing around with remote controls that work much faster, or at all. They're now playing around. This is brain scanning. So your phone will not only measure your heart rate and your steps, and all that, it'll also do automatic brain scanning and feed that into a centralized database. So Nike and Adidas are both looking at launching this in the next couple of years. Apple's looking at this. A whole bunch of companies are now looking at this, and I can guarantee you within the next 2 or 3 years, you will be able to buy on your wristband a way in which you can measure your own brain scanning every day and have it fed back to a central database. Now, one of the reason they're going to use that is they're going to sell that to the older populations of the world on a way in which to predict if you're going to have a stroke. Now, of course, it's not. But they'll make the story up that it's going to help you know that you're going to likely, precursors for having a stroke, something like that. Did anybody see this? You all know what CES is, held in Las Vegas every January. So not this last one, but the one the year before. Fortunately, somebody paid for me to go and spend a couple of days there. This was the most interesting new product I saw. This little thing here, which is about to be sold not in that format, but in the format of a false nail. So when the ladies in the room, if you use false nails, you'll be able to get a set of false nails, and one of them will have that sensor app built into it. The sensor app measures wherever you are, 24 hours a day, the UV that you're being exposed to. And what happens is that when you've got that fingernail, it not only measures it, but it's connected to an app that's then linked to your phone, that it's telling you which L'Oreal product you should be wearing that hour, depending on how much the UV is, right? And of course, you've probably come across apps now that we can have apps so that you can take any food. You go out to dinner, like we did last night, or you go out after this and you eat, and there's a lot of apps where you just take a photo of the app, and the app tells you what the ingredients are that's there, right? So this is now becoming commonplace. You can buy those, download these from the Apple Store, etc. In Japan, Nestle have taken advantage of that app, so they now have a thing where, again, this was aimed at the aging population of Japan, even though it's a young lady, because invariably in Japan what happens is they try to persuade women in their 30s and 40s, buy this for your mother and your grandmother and your great-grandmother, because if you're a woman in the 30s in Japan, there's a good chance that you not only have living mothers, grandmothers, but also living great-grandmothers who are about 108 years old. And the idea is that you use this, and what happens is that the grandmother on her phone will take a photo of whatever she's eating every time she eats. It will analyse it as to what the ingredients are, what the nutritional values are, what you're getting, what you're missing, and then it will recommend to you what Nestle food products, these are high-end concentrate products, that you should be eating, or it'll go through and tell you which product, which is in the form of green tea with different additives, that you can buy, that you can then put in through your, not Nespresso, but the Nespresso type machine that Nestle sells there. So that you can literally, as a 30, 40-year-old, you can make sure that your parents and grandparents, you can get these things done. And it's automatically ordered. So the food, these things, the sachets just come automatically to grandparents' house so they can get their nutritional levels correct. Now, the next thing I'm waiting is for them to tie up with Toto and Nintendo so that it's measuring, you know, you take a photo of the food, you get the thing delivered in the form of green tea with additives, you drink the green tea, 3 hours later you pee it out, the messaging goes to your doctor, and then you get tied up with your, what exercise you're doing for a full life cycle measurement. And of course, marketing also touches on all sorts of things. Another great, it's a great underwear example. Who ever thought there would be a need for a ball sack built into the underpants so that your balls don't rub against your actual legs? Now, have you ever considered that, gentlemen? How many of you in the room are going, yeah, that's not a bad idea, though. I like that, right? Especially if you shave your balls, because it's, it gets a bit too sticky that way, right? So, this company basically has done this great job. But what they've actually done is they've picked up on what marketing is really about. So marketing is not about sales. Marketing is not about pushing what you have. Marketing is not about social media. Marketing is about finding out what people want, even if they don't know they want it, and figuring out how you can deliver something that will help them get there. So for, nobody thinks about this thing about my balls rubbing against my leg as I walk until you tell them that. And then there's always a guy in the room that goes, that's cool, and I guarantee, when we finish, where do they sell that? How do you buy those, right? Victim. Now I pick on him for the rest of the night. So marketing, as you all know, is many, many things. It's a whole mix of things. It's not just social, there's no such thing as, I hate it when I hear the term social media marketing or retail or influencer marketing, because of course they're just tactics within the marketing world. The real thing is to understand what you're trying to do with marketing, which is to create a story that will help you tell people this is a product or a service that's delivering something that will help you achieve what you want to achieve in life. Now, one of the ways in which we start to do that today is using modern technologies like AI platforms that can help you do all sorts of things within the marketing world. Of course, there's barriers to the fact that, the trouble with all this new technology is it's too hard to use, so let's just stick with the stuff we got. Or, well, it's going to be expensive to put in place. But that's actually neither of those are true. Right? Anybody that's a modern sort of marketer knows that there are always cheap ways to use a lot of different sorts of things, relatively cheap ways. All you have to do is put it in the context of things, how it's going to offset other stuff you do. But the other thing you've got to do is realise that sometimes you just got to give up what you see as normal to adopt what's new. Good example is tracking studies. How many people in this room use tracking studies on an ongoing basis, or work for companies that have used tracking studies for a long time, like a Unilever, or a Procter, a J&J, a Coca-Cola, or a Pepsi, or any other big multinational? And it's a trap. It's a trap because why are you doing tracking studies? You're doing them because somebody further up the chain said you need to do tracking studies. And you actually don't actually use the results very often. And you don't really get much in the way of insight from it. But what you can do is take some of that money and use it in innovative ways to really get the better and newer ideas back, the narratives, the insight, and the story that you want to build. I'll explain more how this works in a minute, but one of the things I work with is a platform called Significant Systems, which is an AI-based platform that basically investigates all the content on the internet to help you understand what is the real narrative that's going on in the world by using the internet as a proxy for the real world. So, for example, we did a study where we put in place, looking at the term artificial intelligence across the English-speaking internet world. And what the platform did was it basically ranks things. It uses a Boston Consulting Grid style model, but it ranks things as to what's the most important up near the top, the transient less important, transformative. Nothing about artificial intelligence is now transformative. That's what it told us, right? Why? Because we've been talking about it for so long that we may be waiting for it to actually become real to us, but nothing really surprises us about artificial intelligence anymore. We just assume it's going to happen. But the top 3 ranking things that we found were business strategy tools, digital marketing tools, and intelligence ethics tools. These are the top 3 areas that across the English-speaking internet, looking at literally hundreds of millions of pieces of content, reading that content, not just looking for likes and stuff, but actually reading the content and judging what it's really telling us. These are the 3 big issues that are going on. So think about that, and think about the fact that we need to concentrate on these sorts of areas, because I hate to say it, but it's like the machine can do things that you can't do. The machine can look at and read tens of millions of pieces of content and do an accumulative assessment of all of that, which you couldn't do if you sat there for the rest of your life. So those platforms allow us to just accumulate huge amounts of data and get to simple answers fairly quickly to understand what's important. Of course, artificial intelligence is driving transformative change. We see that no matter what aspect of marketing or business you might be in, the way in which we're looking at artificial intelligence being used for retail purchasing, retail assessment, pricing strategies, etc. The way in which we're looking at artificial intelligence and the way in which it approaches new product development in different categories. The way in which we think about artificial intelligence and the way we're looking at media purchasing at the moment, and the more advanced systems that go beyond programmatic buying. We find that, by looking at this, for example, one of the other areas that came up right near the top, and we did this study about a year ago, and one of the things that came up right near the top was the narrative being built around artificial intelligence-based voice systems. So I have no idea. Is things like Siri and Alexa, are they available here? I have no idea. Yeah?
No.
So who has one of those systems? A Siri, Alexa, one of those types of things, right? Okay, so now those of you that have one of those systems and then run a brand here in Hungary, what voice does your brand use? I mean, literally, what voice? Have you thought about that? No, can't be lady, man, yeah, who cares? What voice specifically? Now think about it. When you ask Siri about, I've got a sore leg, what ointment can I buy at a store here in Hungary to rub onto my sore leg? And I ask Siri that, what voice do I want me telling the answer?
Authoritative and kindly.
You want a voice that has certain types of characteristics. Now, it may be that it's better coming from a male voice or a female voice, younger, older, sounds authoritative, sounds happy, sounds joyful, sounds serious. All those things become really important parts. We think about that in terms of our colouring for our packaging, but in the future, voice is going to be the #1 packaging methodology that you will have. Because the first interaction people will have with your brand will be when they ask a machine and the machine says, you should try this, you should buy this, this will help you. And it has to be delivered in the voice that suits your brand. Now, what's a really famous example of a brand that uses a certain personality, a certain an actor or a famous person as their spokesperson?
Espresso, Clooney.
Nespresso, George Clooney, right? So I used to work on that brand, funnily enough. My daughter, years later, working PR agencies, worked on that brand. You know, George Clooney became the face of Nespresso. Hugely expensive, right? So they're going through the process of trying to figure out the voice for Nespresso. So they're trying to figure out how not to use George Clooney. Why? Why?
He's not exciting anymore.
No, it's too expensive. It's way too expensive. So they're trying to find a George Clooney clone. But the problem is this. Some of the talent agencies in the world are starting now to wanting to register voices. Okay? You register George Clooney's voice. And anything that comes too close to that voice, you can't use. In the same way that Coca-Cola uses, I can't remember the number, PS33 or 39 is their red, right? If you get too close, Coca-Cola will sue you for using their red. Well, now it'll be the voice. Okay? Because of these artificial intelligence machines are going to change the way in which we have to think about packaging, representation. But having said that, don't forget that depending on the culture you live in, the people you're targeting, different mediums are going to still be important. When we did a study of about 30 countries looking at mothers of young under 15-year-old kids across 30 countries a few years ago, one of the things we asked for, what's the best source of advice for a mother? Now, not surprisingly, whether it's around the world, US or Japan, you can see other mums usually come out near the top, your mother or female family members. By the way, the only country in the world where your own mother or members of your mother's generation did not come in the top 10 was China. Why China? Why did Chinese young mothers say, completely reject the idea that their own mother would be a good source of advice?
Because they're dead.
And they're not dead. China has a massive aging population problem, so no, they're not dead.
Because they are not.
Because history.
History. Because everything from simple things like lipstick to nappies to anything that a young, say 35-year-old, which is the oldest of the one-child policy women, now 35, 36 years of age, anything those women, their mothers, they want to do, personal care for themselves, food for their babies, care for their babies, clothes for their babies, didn't exist. And their mothers had no knowledge of things like baby powder, milk powder, did not exist in China when they were young. So their mothers are pointless. It's like, well, we're not going to ask them because they know nothing. But in other countries, of course, they're going to be up near the top. But notice this is really interesting. It all looks pretty easy to understand until you get to that. This is not cable, satellite, special TV, this is broadcast television. Why do Japanese mothers think that broadcast advertising or placement of product on game shows and interview shows is such an important source of mothering information? Because Japan is a collective society. It is the most collective society in the world. Nothing is done unless it works for the collective. Those of you, does anybody speak Japanese? Great, I can make up anything then. When you speak in Japanese, the way you say things is totally controlled by the environment. You use actually different words and phrases for exactly the same reason, depending upon if I'm talking to you when you're alone or I'm talking to you while you're surrounded by other people. Context is everything. And because context is everything, they say this is the really important source because I don't want to be seen to be buying or using something that is not widely used and approved of. And the best way to know it's widely used and approved of is If it's on broadcast TV, everybody else is seeing it, therefore there's much less risk if I use that. Or another technology unique about Japan. Anybody in anything to do with the pharmaceutical health industry? No? Okay, if you ever go on vacation to Japan and you need to go to a pharmacy, they're great. A lot of them don't speak great English, but they're great, okay? But here's the interesting thing. In 65% of all pharmacies you go into, there will be no computer. There will be no computer. Despite the fact that the world's biggest pharmaceutical and OTC companies have literally done campaigns where they'll go, Mr. Pharmacist, I will give you a free computer. I will get it set up for you and I will train you how to use it. No thanks, don't want it. I have a computer at home, but I'm not going to use one at work. I do all of my transactional business via the fax machine. Why the fax machine?
Personal.
Right, because pharmacists in Japan believe that their responsibility first, foremost and always is to the privacy of their individual patients, their individual customers. And they understand that the best way to secure their customers' information is faxes. Because a fax is much, much, much harder to hack than a computer. So they still use faxes. 65% of all faxes sold in the world the last 3 years have been sold in Japan. Some people think it's one of the most and it is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. But there are certain professions there that place ultimate importance on privacy. And fax guarantees more privacy than a computer can ever do. It can be hacked, but it's much harder to do. Another example of Japan of wacky products. You can create any product. I'm sure that all of you work in companies and organisations that are capable of developing all sorts of weird and wonderful products. This is chewing gum. This was developed a number of years ago, and here's the reason why. Historically, Japanese people don't use perfume, they don't use deodorants that have any smell, they didn't really use deodorants that much. Smell didn't play a big part in communal society. Basically from the late 60s until about 15 years ago, gradually the idea of clear deodorant started to take off. But about 15 years ago, some genius at one of the big candy companies noticed that sales of things like perfume and deodorants that actually smell were starting to tick up. Oh, so people like to smell good. We'll get into that. So they created this gum. It's quite interesting. You take a pack of the gum, you put a pellet in your mouth. There were two flavours, rose and lemon. Okay, but 10 minutes after you start chewing, the smell starts oozing out of your skin. So 10 minutes after you start chewing your rose chewing gum, you start smelling like a rose. Okay? It was apparently pretty easy to make. God knows what's in it. And that's where they failed to misunderstand the market. The Japanese people pretty quickly established the fact that, no, this has got to be made up of something that is really chemically horrendous, right? There ain't no lemon juice in that. And there ain't no crushed rose petals in that, right? It's, whoa. It bombed, right? Because they listened to they looked at the market, but they didn't really understand what people wanted, right? Some people did want to smell better, but they don't want to do it in a way that's chemically harmful to themselves. Well, my favourite story from Japan was the story of Fujifilm. So you go back 10 years ago, and Fuji, like Kodak, was dying, literally dying as a company, right? Who buys cameras anymore? Nobody buys film anymore. What the hell are we going to do? The president of Fuji sat there one day and with his board members, and they'd had a long think about it for a while, and he said, look, I've got a plan. I think I know what we can do. Here's the issue. We make film. Nobody's buying film anymore. What's the core ingredient in film? We have, in our main laboratories on the outskirts of Tokyo, we have 100 PhDs who are among the world's leading experts on this one ingredient. What's the core ingredient of old photographic film?
Silver?
Collagen. Collagen. What else is collagen used for, ladies?
For wrinkles.
It's the main ingredient in any form of skin cream you purchase, right? So suddenly he went, wait a minute, we are a film company, but we have 100 PhDs who are actually experts in collagen, not film. Film was dying, but we understand what is growing is we have an aging population, where an aging wealthy population, where an awful lot of middle-aged and older women are willing to spend large amounts of money for very expensive cosmetic products. So they shifted from being Fujifilm and launched Astalift. And Astalift is a premium level range of skincare products. It's the sort of products, this thing here sells for about $90 US a bottle. Right? Now, it's not for everybody. It's not mass market. They went, let's just go super premium. These women will pay anything. And we have the best collagen experts. Understand the market, what people really want, and develop what you've got to match that marketplace. People will believe lots of things. Let's try showing this. I hope this works.
This service-oriented supermarket in Shenyang City, China, has come up with an ingenious new way to make shopping easier for its customers. The market installed train tracks on each of the store's 5 floors. Customers ride down the aisles in private cars, selecting items as they go. So far, shoppers seem to prefer this sit-down style of shopping. Customers say it's less stressful and more entertaining than walking around with a shopping cart. There is one major drawback, however. If you miss an item, you'll have to repeat the ride all the way through the store. Nevertheless, the designers of the coaster cars are hoping the idea will catch on around the world.
So let me ask a simple question. Has it caught on around the world?
No.
Are there one of these supermarkets here in Budapest? No, in fact, it never existed. Now, I've been using that piece of video for over 10 years, and every audience I show it to, even in China, people, even in China, go, oh, that's amazing, I must go there. It doesn't exist. But because it's China, what happens? Because China today is the land of anything's possible. It's full of this weird shit. So of course that could be true, right? So the narrative, it's an example though that if you're a Chinese marketer, you can talk about an awful lot of stuff that people are willing to believe. Okay?
This service work.
Okay. Of course, the way in which you do retail in China is shifting dramatically. Most people under 35 shop almost exclusively online. Something like 60 million Chinese have not used cash or credit cards in any form in the last 6 months. 65 million people have only done everything on their mobile phone, on their automated pay systems. And they buy everything on their mobile phone. We take shortcuts because people are always looking for ways in which they can get that little step, right? And we know that that's true, so how do we build stories that help people make those shortcuts? What's the right story to help them do that? Of course, we provoke ideas. The idea of using advertising or marketing communications to provoke people has been around for millennia. This is a thing from a family needle shop in China from the Song Dynasty, which is about 2,000 years ago. We build brand stories around the desire that people have, not the product we can deliver. So my 25 years of selling Coca-Cola all over Asia was never about selling black fizzy drinks. It was always selling what? Anybody ever work for Coca-Cola?
Happiness.
Yeah, what do they sell? It's happiness is the short term. It's mind, body, and spirit. Mind, body, and spirit come together for a better life, right? Okay. But the person that taught me the most about marketing was this kid on the streets of Bangkok. 17-year-old kid, we were doing street surveys, and one of the young ladies that worked for me there approached this young guy on the street one evening, lots of tattoos, earrings, all sorts of stuff. Stopped me in the street, hey, would you like to spend 5 minutes answering some questions for a survey? Of course, she was a good-looking girl, so he naturally said yes. First question was, as a consumer, stop, I'm not a consumer. I'm a person. Please stop calling me a consumer. Call me a person, because that's who I really am. Which was a great learning. The problem is, as we try to figure out how to do things and treat people as people, we need to understand how people really work. a friend of mine in Singapore offers this service for the aging population of Asia. It's an automated AI-backed system that basically what it does is you can apply it to a piece of packaging, to the way in which your store is laid out, to your advertising. What it does, it measures exactly how old the person should be that is the consumer for this particular product or service. So let's say that you have this piece of packaging and you think that this is perfect to sell to a 35-year-old, say a 35-year-old woman. This thing just does a quick measure, uses this database, and the AI system comes back and says, no, actually, the core target for this, because of the size of the writing, the shape of the bottle, the flexibility, etc., is a 47-year-old. So it automatically reinforces and tells you the differences. An automated machine that can tell you who you really are dealing with, not the people you think you're dealing with, from your product or your service, etc. We're stuck in this world in which, we have to try and use all these advantages to make ourselves stick. Come on. So, take aging populations. We think of aging populations as this. Oh, how do we get to that? Okay. Okay. We think of aging populations as old ladies, right? Pretty unfortunate. When the baby boomers of Japan first started to retire in 2007, the fastest growing category of any product on sale in Japan that year was electric guitars. Literally 60-something guys retiring and getting back together with their high school and university buddies to reform the bands. We shouldn't be thinking about older populations like this. We have to think about them like this. They're more likely to be people that are very attuned to technology. Why? Because a study MIT did a couple of years ago told us that the generation on Earth that is more accepting has had to go through more technology change, accept technology change, and learn to use technology, so the people today between 60 and 75. Because if you think about it, they're the first generation in most countries to have had adapted to television, to Walkman, remote controls, microwaves, autobank machines, PCs, home PCs, video recorders, video cameras, mobile phones, internet, smartphones. When the smartphone, the Apple smartphone first went on sale in 2005, 6 months after it first went on sale, what was the average age of a smartphone owner? 47. 40, why? Because the young people could afford it. Right? It wasn't for kids. Smartphones were the people that are now 60 are the people that have been the technology breakthrough. By the way, MIT also said that anybody under 25 has never had to go through a major technological change because there has been no major new technology in the last 25 years. They're just adaptations of the things from before. So we've got to rethink who are the people we're dealing with all the time. This lady is famous in Japan. She taught herself coding at 81. By the time she was 84, she created the most popular new computer game in Japan. The #1 DJ at clubs in Tokyo at the moment is an 83-year-old. Japanese companies were the first companies to figure out that instead of trying to sell cosmetics aimed at women, because it's all about covering the cracks, it's actually bringing out who you really are. Don't be ashamed of your age, just bring out who you really feel you are. And now, of course, you have the Jane Fondas and everybody else doing that for all sorts of brands. 60 is the new 60. We have to break the bubble on what we know and what we assume about the way in which things work. For example, last year, this guy became, I think, the most important guy in the world of marketing. Who is he? He was the first professional emoji translator. Works in London. He speaks 7 European languages, but he was hired by one of the big banks to full-time translate documents from French, English, German into emoji and vice versa. And you'll go, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Personal example, I have a son at university in Australia. His first year at university, he's at art school, whatever that means. First year at university, at the end of the year, naturally, some professor said, you have to write an essay about your favourite artist and how they contributed to society. Okay, so my son grew up in Japan, so he comes out with a manga artist, and he wants to do that. But then the problem is it had to be 2,000 words. And I don't think my son cumulatively had ever written 2,000 words in his whole life. Like, how can I write 2,000 words about something? And jokingly, I said to him something on the phone about, it's a pity you can't do things in emojis. So the next day he goes to the professor and said, I'm going to write the essay about this guy and about, well, you know, that sounds good. But instead of 2,000 words, can I just use 2,000 emojis? And what was the answer from the professor?
No, I can't read it.
No, he was Australian, so he said, fuck off. Because I can't read it. And nobody at the university could read it. 1 year later, different, same university, same degree, different course, the lecturer, okay, everybody in the class has to write a 250 character essay about this subject, only in emoji, and deliver it tomorrow. So emoji, I don't know about this university, but emoji is now being accepted in some universities as a language you can do essays in. Now, that leads me to a key question I have for all of you. If you want to live in the modern world of technology, first question is, what's your brand that you work on, and what's the emoji for that brand? Do you have an emoji that represents that brand? Is there an emoji that represents the category that you work on? Because if you don't, you better get one fast, because otherwise kids like my 21-year-old son don't know how to write an essay about it. So, emojis are taking over the world. It's a new language. It's the fastest growing language of the world. What's this state say? Look at it. Look at it.
Deadpool.
Deadpool. When the original, not the second one, when the original Deadpool movie was launched in LA, that was the outdoor signage they used. They knew who their target audience was. You can, by the way, you can download automatic translators. At least now they're available English to emoji, emoji to English. I don't know if they're available in any other European language yet. There's also one English to Japanese, Japanese to English. Seth Godin, who you probably read, talks about the fact that the new world is about stories. Well, hopefully so far you've understood that no, storytelling has been around forever. We've always used stories. It's what you're going to tell the story about that matters. So let's have a think about that. The marketer's struggle is really how to connect things, all the devices, all that sort of stuff, but through the story that makes sense to people, that makes them think, you're going to help me. So, keep going. Oh, this is slow. Go back to Googling. If you Google yourself and you're not on Google, you've got a big problem. Right? You just don't exist. And think about it. When you Google your brand or your competitors' brands, what's really there? Because that's the reality of whether they exist or not. But you need to understand, like all the stuff that's going on around you, what's the right story I want them to be saying about me? So, sorry about this. I have no idea if I'm hitting the wrong thing or what.
Pointed at the computer, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So we have all these different terminologies, all these different things that are going on with marketing, but more and more of the different stuff we can do with marketing is going to be driven by AI platforms or AI techniques. Maybe if I use the thingy board up here, and use this. So, you can have automated machines that change the sizing of the messaging that you use depending on whether or not you think people are on the go, whether it's lean in type content, whether it's lean back type content. Basically lean in is shorter, while lean back is longer type contents. And automatically you can use different AI platforms that will recut the video of your content to do that for you now. No need for studios. You can do it so that they take the same piece of content and they deliver it in different formats, different types of messaging, and it's all automated. Well, that's great. Different types of things for different types of platforms. That's all generated from a machine. It takes 10 minutes once you give it the raw stuff. Well, what about this? We saw this experiment years ago, the ACON project, which was the idea of a computerised system that basically took your photograph and then a machine would do a sketch of you based on the photograph, right? Well, that sounds pretty good. Did any of you read about this a few years ago? My old company in Japan introduced the McCann AICD. Any of you ever seen that? So it's an actual AI system that creates scripts for TV commercials. They actually, you feed it into a brief, you type it in. It works on a database of 100,000 commercials that it's analysed. And then what you do is you give it the brief and it creates an original script for you based on the input you put in. You all know the company Mondelez? Anybody here from Mondelez? No? So Mondelez in Japan actually did the main trial for this. What they did was they gave the same brief to live, real creative teams and ad agencies and to the machine, and then got a bunch of independent people who didn't know who developed these to judge them and then to make them. And the machine came second out of 7 different entries. Now they use it as a standard thing, so that what they do is they always get the machine to come up with alternative scripts to anything and see which one that plays out best in research. Dentsu Aegis just recently introduced their own AI creative director, which is actually a copywriter. So what you do with this one is, as you know, when you're doing stuff online, you need to have multiple different versions of copy, right? Longer versions, shorter versions, versions that have different touch points, versions for different audiences. What you do is you feed a brief into this, and you say, I need 75 different versions based on this criteria, and it creates the original copy and then gives you the 75 different versions for the different types of audiences in 30 minutes. AI systems will take you from this, which is the traditional sort of analytic tools that we used to use, which was called, we do a survey to decide on the audience, and we figure out the audience is, an 18 to 24-year-old female online shopper, and she lives in Illinois. But now you can have AI systems that automatically use these combinations of data, and literally in minutes will feed out a profile like this. No, not only that, but you're a high-income luxury shopper, runner, lives in Chicago, Illinois, college graduate, visited makeup pages twice a week, likes musicals, frequently beauty blogs, a mother, spent 250 whatever, da da da. This is generated from automated systems that are just looking at stacks and stacks and stacks of data. I work with a company in Asia now that uses 7 major data points in 18 different countries. Those data points are the national census, the single largest bank's database, the MasterCard database, the tax department's database, right? And then whatever the single largest supermarket database is, and it basically can come up with, you feed in what you want to know, and it will come up with a segment and tell you exactly how many people and where they're distributed across the country, across the city, down to city blocks. And it does all of that in a day. Breaking the bubble is what AI is all about. It's the ability for us to use machines to help us break the bubble of our own limited knowledge. I'm sure there are people in this room that are much smarter, much more experienced than I am. I'll guarantee it. But every one of you is dumb as shit. Because the reality is that human beings cannot know very much. Our experiences cannot help us really know very much. And what's happening now is we're able to use an extension of ourselves. In Japan, that's the way they refer to robots and AI, as just simple extensions of the human brain. Not the other, not the alternative, not a danger, but an extension of who we are. And we use those things to help us understand things. Whether it's Jack Ma being able to figure out that, we'll never ever be able to compete with AI again when it comes to actual data and how to use data. 55% of people in a survey agreed AI will be more disruptive than social media. 55% of marketers in a worldwide survey last year. 80% said increasing or implementing AI in 2018, 2019 was a priority in their business. So, back to the platform I use. It creates a model, a simple landscape model. Here's what happens. Let's say I want to understand coffee in Hungary. I ask the machine by filling in a little form about what's the story with coffee in Hungary. It then goes in and it looks at every piece of content in Hungarian that's ever been read or used in Hungary. Anything that's on the internet. Not just the recent stuff, anything that's ever appeared on the internet. Now, how many pieces of content do you think would be in Hungarian about coffee? It's some way touching on coffee.
Billions.
Hundreds of millions, God knows how many, right? What it does then is it looks at those millions of pieces of content, it reads the content. It doesn't rely on things like numeric analysis. It reads the content. So imagine when you were at university and somebody said you've got to write an essay and you read 10 magazine articles, or you pretended to read 10 magazine articles, and you said, my analysis is this. It works exactly like that. It's a qualitative tool en masse. It's qualitatively assessing all the content, what it says, and then telling you this, every one of these dots is a key narrative around the subject. So it might be espresso, cappuccino, coffee drunk after dark, coffee mixed into cakes, etc., etc. Whatever the narratives it finds, it places them on this landscape, which is telling us whether or not they're transient. It lacks real engagement. It's not going to go very far. It's a narrative that's tribal, limited, highly debated at the moment, may or may not go any further. Whether it's timeless, something that you can't avoid. Espresso, right? Probably is a timeless coffee narrative. I don't know. Or transformative, something that's changing the nature of the category altogether. And then underneath each narrative, there's a live report that tells you the overall effect, the emotional activation cues, because what it's doing is it's actually reading the content, and by reading the content, it's able to analyze and tell you what emotions are being generated by that narrative. It's then telling you which is the most powerful content that's driving that particular narrative, where it's to be found on the internet, which platforms, which websites, etc., is it Facebook, whatever. Visual exploration, it puts together a montage board of what you see as the key visuals around that narrative, and then it does stupid things like word clouds, which I can never figure out how to use word clouds. So that's my ignorance. How's it used? Well, things like this. A Japanese company was launching a new green tea product in Japan. It was supposed to be the most authoritative real green tea, traditional green tea style. So they launched it. This is the emotional response it got. As you can see, it was already timeless when it was launched. How can a new product be timeless? Because the machine went in, read it, and gathered that all the content was saying this thing was so genuine, it had captured the timeless nature of genuine green tea. Fantastic. Very, very positive. This is all the emotions that were generated by the content around it. Green emotions are positive. The heavier the green, the more positive. Pink emotions are negative. Blue emotions are tonal cues. So you can see, though, that over the second quarter, it starts to slip, and the green gets a bit lighter, and by this quarter, more pink, greens have got lighter, and it's already transient. Why? Because where it did the visual cues, it automatically collates these photos of the most common bits of content. And what it's saying here is, when it launched, it was all about the product itself. The product itself. Over time, it slipped to start talking more about promotional things. So the client was able to use this very quickly and go back and negotiate with the major retailers in Japan to make sure they didn't lose shelf space by showing, oh, we understand what we did wrong, we're going to drop promotions and go back to just talking about the core equities. Now, here's the difference. You could do normal tracking studies. What's a normal tracking study? 10, 15, 100,000 people, it takes weeks to put in place to get the results. 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours, at about a tenth the price of a normal tracking study. You can generate automatically your social media content things. This platform, if you say you're interested in work-life balance and that's a key thing for your business, and you want to talk about work-life balance, you want your social media to be full of articles about it, what it does is every single morning when you wake up, it's generated a personalised magazine for you on the work-life balance articles that it's around the world, or in whichever market you want, in whichever language you want. What does it see as the key work-life balance articles generated in the last 24 hours? It ranks them so that you can literally drop and paste those straight into your Facebook page or whatever other social media you want your company to have. You no longer have to do any research on what your content for social media is. It'll do it for you. Not only does it do it for you, but it also each day generates this map. Now, you can do it by country, by global. So, for example, this is work-life balance on the same day. This was in the United States. This is in Japan. If you want to know why it's so different, I can tell you. But it allows you to do those sorts of things. It generates things so that each week you get a rolling thing of what are the most popular, sorry, not the most popular, what's the most important pieces of content over the last month. So you can reinvest in those articles, re-summarise or re-contact or re-comment on those articles in your social media platform, and it continues to give you an updated cycle of what are the emotions generated around that subject area. And it also tells you which are the most important pieces of content, which are the strongest stories, and why they're the strongest. So what it's doing is, in the traditional sense of finding an insight, it's doing all the data points and all the understanding for you. Now, does it really come up with an insight? Well, that's up to you to add a little bit of, nous up here, based on your own background and history. But let me give you one example of the way in which we're using it. We started doing a study called Wellness Matters. This came about because an organisation that is the Global Wellness Summit, which is sort of the mother industry body for the wellness industry, asked me a simple question. Which 5 countries influence wellness the most? So we did a study. We found out the 5 countries that influence the wellness industry the most. And they are, anybody want to guess the 5 countries that influence wellness the most?
In Canada, America,
America, India,
Sweden,
Germany, Japan, Italy. They're the top 5. The machine did, not me. The machine looked at literally billions of pieces of content and was able to analyse that those are the markets that are generating change the most. They're creating the news on a more constant basis, the things that make the biggest difference. Some of those other countries you mentioned are in the top 10, places like Sweden, etc. But they're the top 5. But then they asked us to go and look at, well, what are the real things that are going on in some of those markets? So we used the platform to try and judge this. Again, if you look at wellness, for example, the USA, very timeless. This is the emotional output. Overall, when we just look in the USA at all content that had anything to do with wellness, this is the emotions that are generated. You can see a lot of light green, a lot of tonal cues like surprise, astonishment, wonder, and some pink, right? Fear, etc. But let's look at it on a bigger scale. We also looked at it in terms of some other countries as well. I looked at Singapore. We chucked in Hungary the other day to see where it ranks. You can see here that wellness as a narrative, okay, in the US, up the top, Singapore, Italy, Japan and Hungary, more here. Borderline between timeless and transient. Now, that's not to say that Japan's not very influential, but in Japan itself, what we found out was something quite interesting, was that while Japan influences the rest of the world, Japanese take it very, very seriously. Very, very seriously, and found there was a lot of negativity around it as well, because they thought it was a lot of what's called wellness today is superfluous, sort of too lightweight. What's the overall effect that's created? Well, it's all basically delighted, so there's no, it's positive and active, it's a big growing industry, but you can see again that places like Singapore are perhaps doing a bit better than places like Italy, where the overall effect is not as strong as it should be, and perhaps it's not near as active as it should be. People aren't talking about it. Again, they take it for granted. Japan is an interesting place when you think about wellness, right? We looked at, 5 years ago, we looked at 26 countries around the world about wellness, and one of the issues that I discovered at the time was that in 24 of the 26 countries we looked at, when you ask people which country is the most well, the answer was Japan. Weirdly, which 2 countries did not say Japan? Which 2 countries said their own country was the most well country? The US, beyond all disbelief from all foreigners, land of the obese, was, and China. Yeah, and China, because they had this belief that we're fantastic. But everywhere else, and the reason why people around the world said that Japan was the most well was the belief that they all eat sushi all the time. They don't, it's too expensive. What's the most common food in Japan? The number 1 popular 50% of all lunches are curry rice. And it's actually English-based curry. It doesn't even taste like real curry. But the belief is that. They believe that Japanese people are full of zen, right? And they also believe that Japanese people have the best toilets. Right? So that and the best technologies. But here's the interesting thing. When we looked at the what emotion is generated within, say, these 5 countries, you can see some pretty interesting differences. You can see that, you know, a lot of this area here, this is gravity and earnestness. This is what goes on in Japan. The emotion is generated by the narrative around wellness is much more about that, as opposed to Italy, where a lot of positive, but not very strong positive. So we can see that sort of easiness, tranquility, calmness are common in the USA and Italy. In Hungary, we found things like bad temper. I don't know why it's coming out like this. We'll keep on going. Oh. So we saw things like surprise and astonishment are associated with wellness in Hungary, but there's also some of this sort of negativity going on. You can see in Singapore, there's also some negativity going on with closeness, belonging, joy, which is different from the types of positive emotions generated, say, in Italy. So if you're a wellness marketer, this helps you figure out very quickly what the differences are, how your language should be different, what issues you should be talking about in those different markets. It then gives you these full sort of reports that allows you to see what are the key pieces of content associated. This is Japan, for example, or Italy, sorry, these got a bit away, Singapore, and you're able to get a hold of the differences. In Singapore, a lot of the debate about wellness is actually driven by American-based articles that are then reprinted and reused in Singapore. We were able to look at things like wellness and food and what the differences between different marketplaces are around wellness and food, wellness and nutrition, etc., etc., etc. So you can get to a lot of depth very quickly. Now, the point about all that is, from the time you ask me to do the study, or Steve works me up with this, so ask Steve to do it here, but from the time you ask us to do the study to the time you get the full report is maximum 3 weeks. And the 3 weeks is only because it depends on which language we're doing it in. If it's a language we haven't done before, I'm doing a project at the moment in Mongolia. So it's the first time we've ever had to do a project in Mongolian. And so it's a language issue and also the size of the internet. But it's very quick. It's the sort of study, imagine if you were going to do a global study on wellness using traditional methods, qual one. It would take you somewhere between 6 weeks and 3 months, and probably just 5 or 6 countries would probably cost you $250,000, right? So this can be somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 depending on the depth you want to go, and maximum, usually a week up to 3 weeks to get full delivery of the full reporting. So all of this helps us actually understand things. When I showed this to the client, the Global Wellness Summit, they were really interested because what I was able to do is then point out specific articles in specific markets that the platform had told us were the most important content. So in America, the most important content was this. It was all about which retailers are embracing health and wellness. And what was surprising to them was they expected some companies like Anthropology or The Goods or Apple to be doing it. They weren't thinking about people like Westfield or Saks, Fifth Avenue, to be actually companies that were leading edge. Now, that was a published article they just missed, but we were able to, by doing this report, show them the stuff that was really getting to the core issues. And we were able to show them which trends were really taking off by using this narrowgraphics approach. Narrowgraphics basically is the adaptation of AI-driven data to graphically imaging it so that everybody can understand it. For example, the vaccine debate that's going on in the United States, right? Yeah, if you're talking about chickenpox vaccines, this is the narrative around that. Hugely negative, lots of things. HPV vaccine, which is a vaccine for a rare kidney disease. Oh, no, that's... Sorry?
It's human papillomavirus, isn't it?
Yes, that's right, yes. So that's much more positive. Still the overhanging thing about anxiety, but there's a lot more positivity and a lot more tonal cues about things like hope, expectation, etc. We can also use it, though, to do normal tracking. This was done for the telco industry in Singapore. There are 3 major telcos. They all did tracking. Now, how do most companies decide on what to track? If you have a tracking study, how do you normally decide what to track? Think about it. You have a survey, you're going to survey 10,000 people every quarter, and you're going to ask them their opinion about...
You're probably going to ask them what you asked them previous to.
You're going to always ask them what you asked them previously, but who decided those ones in the first place? Well, it's probably the person that was in your boss's position 10, 15, 20 years ago. And secondly, it was based on what they felt gut had told them was the most important things. No, what we do is we feed in and we look for the narratives that are most important. We found out that these are the 10 narratives that are most important around telco in Singapore. And then what we do is we get the platform to rank them. So it's ranking what they are in terms of importance. And then what we do is we get the platform to look at each of these things, like fast, so it ranks what's happening and tells us the emotion that's being generated by each of the brands against that particular attribute. And of course, we can break this down and give you in numbers tables if you want it, but in terms of dashboards, it works much better like this. So instead of it being reliant on somebody, in my gut experience tells me that in our category, this is the most important thing. No. We've analysed 2 billion pieces of content from Singapore that have something to do with telcos and found out what is the most important attributes, how they rank, and how the different brands rank against them. Do it in a week. Do it for $10,000. Etc., etc., etc. Lots of different examples of the way in which we can do this. Luxury retail, how we can develop, a daily feed for the luxury retail business. The point about that is that in today's world, you need all 5 of these things. You need rich insight that's coming from looking at millions and millions of pieces of data. You need actionable stuff, so greater specificity coming from the content that matters. You need predictive qualities, so by looking at the landscapes, we're able to tell which are the narratives that are most likely to be important going forward. You need real time. You can't wait months for things, a few days maybe. If you want to do very simple searches, it'll take an hour. And of course, it's much more cost effective. So, if I go back to my original question, all of these things are really important to us. Now I'm going to ask you a simple question. Sir, for the rest of your life, you have to give up one of these 3 things. Which one are you going to give up?
Depends.
You're going to get, most men in the room are going to say, I'll give up my underpants. Until the 3rd or 4th day, you're walking around without them. And then you're going, oh my God. Why do we wear underpants? What's the real reason we wear underpants? It's not because they're a nice pattern. It's not because David Beckham wears that design. It's not because my wife says it makes me look sexier. Why do you really wear underpants?
It's comfortable hygiene.
Because hygiene, 2 reasons, right? Roughage and leakage. Leakage because you want to absorb, every man leaks. That's why when we go to the loo, ladies, at the end of our little session in the loo, we always start doing this. Right? But we always miss a drop. So there's that, but roughage. Because it rubs a lot. Just going commando with no underwear rubs a lot.
I know that.
Yeah? You know that?
I'm Scottish. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Free and easy. So yes, we say that. Now let's say you had to give up 2. What would be, you weren't going to give up underpants, what else are you going to give up? You're going to give up the phone. Okay, wise man, because otherwise he'd have to shit in the street for the rest of his life. Okay? Remember what I said? No technology defines middle classness more than this. For over 200 years, it's been the defining technology that drives being middle class. And why do we say that? Because no technology in the history of mankind saves more lives than a flushing toilet. If you've never lived in a house with a flushing toilet and you move in, every member of your family's life expectancy goes up by 5 years. The girls in your family, the chances of the daughters of your family finishing high school go up by 200%. 200%. The chances of the women in your family ever being raped are reduced by 95%. because most rapes happen after dark when women have to leave their hut, their home, and go do their business in the street or in the field or whatever. That's why the Prime Minister of India, for all the rubbish, and he's a crap right-wing Prime Minister, but his great promise that won in the election was every village in India by 2021 will have a flushing toilet. Not every home, every village. And that will make a huge difference. But yes, so that's very unusual that you say, I'll give up my phone and keep my toilet. It's a wise move. But here's the thing I want you to think about. All of these things, we have built up lifetime stories around them. We understand and we may not think about them. And if you're marketing, what you really have to understand is what's going to be the really great story. If I want to make sure that you don't give up underpants, it's no good just putting really sexy guys in those underpants. I have to start telling you about war. Maybe I've got to start telling you about what you're going to miss out if you stop wearing them. Not the Scots. They're tough as little nails. Okay, so it's all digital, it all works. The future is about reaching people, whether it's elderly ladies like this, but reaching people with stories that really are telling them things, stories that help them get the things they want in life to make their future life happier. And you need technology today to find out what those stories really are. So if you want to know more, you can contact me or contact Steve, and I'll be glad to send you this deck or lots of other examples. Thanks very much.
Super.